Good evening. What a wonderful crowd. My name is Natalie Turvey. I'm Executive Director of the Canadian Journalism Foundation. On behalf of the CJF, Chorus, and Global News, welcome to this sold-out CJFJ Talk, the first of our season, on the pursuit of truth in what continues to be an unprecedented and unpredictable time in news. You made a great choice tonight, and I think you'll agree with me that this discussion could not be more important or timely. If you'd like to join tonight's conversation on Twitter, you can do that using the hashtag CJFJTalk. I'd like to thank those who make our events possible, BMO Financial Group, our JTalk series sponsor, and our thanks to Cision, our in-kind sponsor. Tonight, we're joined by the reliable source in the age of misinformation, Brian Stelter. He's been leading the way in bringing news literacy to the greater public through a multi-platform global media beat he's created for CNN. One Atlantic piece called him America's most influential teacher of media literacy in the digital age. And it's no exaggeration. We're thrilled to have him here tonight. The CJF has made media literacy a core part of our mission for nearly 30 years. Our motto, as journalism goes, so goes democracy, feels even more relevant than ever before. Along with highlighting and celebrating the important work journalists do to keep citizens informed and hold the powerful to account, we're very proud to be developing a news literacy program in partnership with Civics, an outstanding organization. The program launches this spring and will provide 1.5 million school-aged Canadians, a generation that consumes a lot of information on a lot of platforms, with the tools and skills they need to understand how quality journalism works and how to determine which sources of online information are reliable. So on to our program. We're delighted to be here in this stunning space thanks to Chorus and Global News, a news organization that embodies some of the best traditions in journalism. To introduce our moderator, please join me in welcoming Senior Vice President of News, Radio, and Station Operations for Chorus, Troy Reeb.
Thank you, Natalie, and welcome to all of you to this beautiful facility of ours. And we're very glad that you could come visit us this evening, as opposed to about a week and a half ago when the hydroponic system behind this green wall was broken and this entire atrium smelled like an aquarium with a broken filter. Really looking forward to the conversation between our moderator and our guest tonight and all of you. And if I can just sort of provide a little frame for it. I keep asking this question as someone who leads a very large news organization. What role is left for us as gatekeepers when it seems that the gate itself is gone? And in fact, not just the gate, but the fences are all gone, and everything seems to be getting through to the public. The value of the journalist was never just, I would put it, in the information that we passed along, but in many ways the greater value was in the information that we filtered out. Conspiracy theorists have long asked journalists, what are you holding back? What are you not telling us? And the truth is, a lot. We didn't share unfounded rumors, we didn't share idle gossip, unverified or poorly sourced information. And it seems that all of that stuff is now making it through to the public, sometimes with as much or even more amplification as factual reporting. Journalists certainly have not always gotten it right, but historically we were trained, we held each other accountable, as our guest tonight is an expert in doing. We weeded out bad actors, we ensured information was verified, and we double-sourced before reporting. We also sought out sourcing the people most expert in their fields so that when an opinion was delivered, the audience could rely on it coming from a place of expertise and not ignorance. We often talk about the internet giving equal weight to all voices, which is great in a democratic sense, but not so much when the medical opinions of a charlatan are given equal weight to those of a doctor. There is no doubt that we as journalists need to be more connected to the concerns of the audiences than ourselves. But I'm always amused by this cottage industry that seems to have developed around deriding the so-called media elites, as if knowing what you're talking about was somehow a bad thing. Our moderator tonight would definitely qualify as a media elite. After all, it was only the finest barley and wheat that grew on her family's grain farm in southern Manitoba. And she was so spoiled that she didn't even learn to drive the tractor until she was 6. As a teenager, she seemed to get all the lucky breaks. First, the potato peeling job at the truck stop, then the dishwashing job at the truck stop, and then finally, yes, the waitressing job at the truck stop. Clearly, the Friesen name carried a lot of weight in Manitoba. The ivy-lined walls of Red River College beckoned, then CKX Brandon, CKPR Thunder Bay, clearly elite organizations all. But eventually CTV National News, NBC Nightly News, The Today Show. And after traversing the globe from Iraq and Afghanistan to Buckingham Palace, Dawna Friesen came home to us to become the first woman to solo anchor one of Canada's big 3 national newscasts, which only happened 7.5 years ago, but somehow seems like a very quaint statement to make nowadays. Thank God for that. What makes Dawna one of the elite journalists, not just here in Canada, but I would say in any country, is the belief in public service that was exemplified by her mom in southern Manitoba, who happened to chair the White Horse Plains School Division. It is the work ethic that she honed in all of those small market newsrooms, and dare I say, behind the potato peeler in that truck stop. And it is certainly the integrity that is rooted as much in the farmland of Manitoba as it is in her oft-stated desire to have a fairer, more informed world for her son to grow up in, and indeed for all of our children to grow up in. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you to our moderator tonight, Dawna Friesen.
Wow, Troy, thank you so much. Thanks for spilling it all out there, starting right from the potato peeling. Thanks for all of you being here tonight, too. I know there's a lot of you in the audience who are in the field of journalism, who are passionate about what it is we do and how we try to do it better, what we always strive to do. So it's a pleasure to have all of you in this audience. You know, 2017 was such a year of disruption, of course, and upheaval. And as we forge ahead into 2018, a lot of us are wondering how we make sense of the moment we are in. There's a sense, of course, that we're not on firm ground in so many ways, in journalism, in the political sphere, in communications and technology. Everything seems to be moving and shifting under our feet. The media is under assault like never before, not only because the traditional business model is broken, but because the President of the United States has become our insulter-in-chief. He has gone so far as to call the media the enemy of the people, which is the kind of thing that you think you'd hear in the Stalin era of Russia, not in America in 2018. And of course, he uses the term fake news so freely in reference to any story that he doesn't like. So yet here we all are as journalists tasked with trying to make sense of all this and explain it to our readers, our listeners, our viewers, and try to explain the significance. And never before, I think, have we so consistently been asking, what should we do? And one man who consistently tries to find the answers to that, here it comes, is Brian Stelter. Such an honor to have Brian here. He is host of Reliable Sources. Of course, all of you will know him already, but I'm going to give you a quick little bio. Prior to joining CNN in November of 2013, Brian was a media reporter at the New York Times. In 2007, he covered television and digital media for the Business Day and Arts section of the newspaper. He was also a lead contributor to the Media Decoder blog. And while he was still in college, he created TV Newser, a blog dedicated to the TV news industry. And he wrote the best-selling book, Top of the Morning, about the rivalry between morning TV shows in the U.S. So please welcome Brian Stelter.
Thank you.
Brian, we watch a lot of you on CNN here in Canada because, of course, CNN knows no borders, and we're all following you quite closely. And I want to start by asking you a question about the man at the very top. That's a good place to start, President Trump.
Oh, I thought you meant God.
No, that's coming. The relationship between President Trump and the media it's both symbiotic and it's abusive. you need each other, but he has been more abusive to the press than any president, I think it's safe to say, ever. Give us a sense of how much of a disruptive force you think President Trump has been in his first year in office.
I think we're going to look back, and it's going to be before Trump and after Trump. We're going to divide, at least the history that I've lived through, American history that I've lived through, as before Trump and after Trump. And with regards to the press, I think it's become a tremendous opportunity to cover the greatest story in the world, to get to the bottom of the chaos and dysfunction in the White House, to guide people through this daily crisis that's unfolding. And every time he attacks, it's an opportunity to explain why we do what we do and how we do it and how we know the news is real, not fake. So I'm going to try to be an optimist up here and say it's a great opportunity. When he calls real news fake, it's a great chance for us to explain why we do what we do. And yes, it is also poisonous and it does damage, and there's no way to minimize that. But he has rejuvenated American journalism in many ways, and he's given us these opportunities to, in a way, kind of explain and assert ourselves that we hadn't had before.
So let's try to dissect that a little bit. Calling the media the enemy of the people is actually a dangerous thing to do, right? It leads people down a dangerous road. It not only leads to kind of, further erodes the trust in the media, but it's led to journalists have faced death threats. CNN had a threat made against it. Talk a bit about
earlier this month, a man in Michigan repeatedly calling CNN's operators in Atlanta various numbers, and at one point actually using the term fake news before saying, "I'm coming to gun you all down." I think this was a very explicit and frightening example of something that's been happening in a broader way on a regular basis in newsrooms. And this time it happened to involve CNN, but certainly that kind of vitriol has been directed at other newsrooms as well.
So how did that go over internally at CNN? It must have been a very troubling day.
I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I think it was worrisome to a lot of people because it was a reminder of the daily trouble, the daily challenge that all these institutions face. But I don't think it's limited to CNN. I think it applies to others as well. It's not as if I'm worried to going to work every day, because I'm not, and I don't think my colleagues are. But I think we are aware that there's a venom out there that didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago, to the degree that it does now. I think we got to put this in context, though. 20, 30 years ago, Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich were telling Americans not to believe the news media. We're telling Americans the media was biased. The difference now is people are being told the media is fake, right? It's one thing to say biased. There's actually an opening for a constructive conversation you can have about bias. To call the news fake and try to discredit it and say it shouldn't exist is an entirely different matter. And that's where we are now, and I think we need to recognize the stakes of that. But I try to be optimistic about this because I think it does give us chances to explain our jobs. The dark side of it, though, is very clear when you see this man in Michigan arrested, and in many other times in the past year where you just see the kind of hate and vitriol that's directed at news organizations.
And reporters have had death threats during the campaign, too. How do you convince voters, Americans, to agree on a shared set of facts when the president and Fox News is telling you one version and others are telling you another? How do you break through that? How do you elevate and convince people that actually there's only one agreed, shared set of facts?
Truthfully, I don't know if I do. And I think that's what a lot of us in this room wrestle with. What can we each individually do to try to improve this environment, this news media ecosystem, where it feels like there are alternative narratives or alternative realities or alternative universes that people are existing in. It is certainly much more potent now than let's say it was 10 years ago. I think on an individual level, I can contribute a little bit, and I think all of us contribute a little bit by trying to focus on factual information and point out what's going on the other side, the confusion and the fog machines that are being turned on sometimes by politicians. I remember interviewing Kellyanne Conway last fall, whenever I would talk about Russia, she would try to talk about Hillary Clinton, right? She would try to change the subject to something she preferred to talk about. There are some hosts on Fox News that live in an alternative reality where Hillary Clinton is president because they'd rather her be president for some reason. And I think to be able to point that out, to point out that she's changing the subject, to point out that they're living in an alternative universe, contributes at least a little bit so that we understand what's going on in other bubbles or other silos or other fortresses that people are living in terms of their media consumption. But I'm kind of avoiding your questions. I don't have a good catch-all answer. I think it's little contributions we can each make every day, helping people have a balanced and healthy media diet. And I would like to say that most Americans are getting that, and most consumers are getting that we see what's going on the extremes. And there's a lot of attention on the kind of pro-Trump extreme, but there's also an extreme sort of anti-Trump, very far left point of view out there that's very hateful toward the media. We hear what's on those extremes, we see it, it is disturbing, but I also try not to elevate it more than it deserves to be elevated. There's a fine line here. I want to recognize that there are anti-journalism, anti-media voices out there that aren't trying to make us better, they're trying to tear us down. But at the same time, I don't want to treat them like they're 12 feet tall if they're only 4 feet tall. And I think we have to be sensitive about that. We have to recognize that traditional mainline news brands in the United States, the CNNs and NBCs and New York Times, are doing really well and are drawing big audiences and are even if people don't always trust the media, they are tuning in remarkable numbers. And that makes me feel somewhat more hopeful about this environment of alternative universes that we do live in.
Journalists who cover the president have just had a wild ride for the last year. Well, the year before that too, of course, during the campaign. And he's been good for ratings. He's been good. All those things you say about the surge is in part due to him becoming president, right? People are paying attention more than they have. They're watching CNN more. Your ratings.
Yeah, it's either out of fear or excitement or enthusiasm.
Yeah. And I know he says you'll be sad when I'm gone because the ratings are going to tank again. How good has he been for business?
Yeah. I'm a pretty big news nerd. I look at the ratings every day, not just for CNN, but for a variety of channels and the subscription rates for the New York Times and the Washington Post and other papers. I think there were trends happening with or without Trump. There was intense interest in the election because the result of the election was going to be historic in either direction. So I would not give Trump complete credit. I would also not claim that without Trump, these networks are going out of business. I think he recently said that in 3 years, if he's not reelected, the networks will go out of business. It's kind of typical, hyperbole. Funny, ridiculous Trump hyperbole. I think the fact of the matter is there's been an awakening among Americans about politics, particularly on the left, but to some degree on the right. And that benefits ratings for networks, but it also, I think, benefits the civic discourse to have more people interested in what's going on. And some of that's measurable through the ratings. Some of it's maybe measurable at the ballot box in the fall of this year. We shall see. But certainly, I think some of the president's own instincts toward media have been really obvious, to journalists and to the public. Like the way he thinks about ratings, the way he thinks about sales, it must drive him bonkers that Fire and Fury is the #1 book in the country for a 4th week in a row. He cares about those metrics deeply, and I think it's important to know that about him as we study and cover him.
So I wonder if it really is raising the level of public discourse. I mean, I would argue that it's declining, and that there's a lot of news, and we always struggle. I know at our organization we struggle with how much to cover Donald Trump. Right. I wish in a Canadian newscast that we wouldn't have to lead with the president. Of course, we don't have to, but often, when he says, names certain countries and calls them shitholes, we're going to cover it because it's a slur on so many people around the world. We struggle with that, and we kind of wish that we wouldn't feel we need to react when he says a lot of these hyperbolic things, and sometimes racist things and misogynistic things. But I feel like since he's president, we have to. And I'm not sure that when we do that, when we cover those things, are we really raising the level of public discourse? Or are we just kind of increasing the, we all talk about what he said, but do we really think deeply about what it means? I'm not sure.
He's definitely right. He's teaching us about the attention economy,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Because of the way he's able to command attention.
Yes.
I don't know if shithole's the best example because he said it in a room where, he didn't say it in front of microphones. He might not have thought it would leak, although that's nutty. I mean, of course it was going to leak with a bunch of Democrats in the room. But, in any case, that quote comes out, whether he wanted it to or not, and creates a week of news coverage. I could have done without day 6 of the coverage, because by day 6, this was a debate over whether people recalled whether he said it or not, and exactly what modifier he put in front of the word. And by then, I think at that point, we've started to miss the point of what he originally said. So, I think those are daily editorial decisions that are easy for me to say, I wish I would have done it differently. But, I'll take Sunday as an example. Sunday, I had a non-Trump segment planned on my show. Can you believe it? It was going to be a non-Trump segment. It was about Rupert Murdoch wanting Facebook to pay for news. And
I love that topic.
I did too. I was super psyched, and then President Trump tweeted. And no joke, this is actually a very specific case because he tweeted about Jay-Z. Here the president goes again, targeting an African-American celebrity and talking about the black unemployment rate. And because this had all started on CNN with Van Jones, I texted Van, called Van, asked if he could come in to react. And I think on that day it was the right editorial choice because I thought it was important to fact check what the president was saying about the unemployment rate. But once again, he commanded more attention and brought the story back to words he had said or comments he had made or credit he had demanded to receive. I think 1,000 of those decisions add up to a place where he feels like the only story. Mm-hmm. Now, I tell myself, and here is my kind of theory of the media universe, is that mobile phones have changed everything, and television is different as a result, profoundly different. Television news is not what it was 10 years ago because you have all the news in the world on your phone. So I think that does change cable news. I think that makes cable news more of a opinion format, more of a talk format, and more of a one story at a time format, whether that was the train crash in Virginia today or whether it's a racist remark by a president. But at the same time, there's a risk that people are not getting a balanced news diet as a result. And I think we're kind of in this transition period of what is the impact of the phone and the digital kind of economy doing on the news media. And I think one change is on television, we're covering Trump quite a lot, quite a bit. But there can be positives from that as well. And I think I find myself thinking a lot about the connection between the phone, kind of what I'm seeing on my phone during the day from news, versus what's on the television screen, and how can we make that work really well together? Sorry for the long answer.
I want to go back to the election campaign, and in hindsight, do you think the coverage could have been different, should have been different, that the news networks, cable news networks in particular, played a role in getting Donald Trump elected because he was such good TV?
I think The Apprentice played a bigger role than a lot of folks have reckoned with. And if I could go back to June of 2015, I would have put more television critics and more business reporters on the air to assess Donald Trump from their perspectives. Because once he was a presidential candidate, he was covered like a politician by political reporters who were superb at their jobs. But he was also a television star performing a television show on the campaign trail. And I wish we had, and that's partly on me. I could have booked more TV critics myself. Wish we had seen him more from the perspective of people who knew The Apprentice well and knew his business as well. And at CNN, for example, we hired Bill Carter, who's a TV columnist at the New York Times I worked with. He had covered Trump. He came over to CNN. I think networks did respond, but I would have liked to see more of that. But
there were an awful lot of rallies, an awful lot of Trump rallies.
But I don't buy it. This is the debate that will go on for all time. I'll just take my little sliver of CNN for a minute. I went back and I read the transcripts of every show from the 18 months of the election, because I wanted to do a real kind of honest evaluation of myself, at least, because that's what I could control personally. And my biggest regret actually wasn't about Trump, it was about Bernie Sanders. I didn't take Bernie seriously enough. Like a lot of people, I figured Clinton had the nomination, and the story on the Democratic side wasn't as interesting or as dramatic, and I should have paid attention to what was happening with Bernie, because what was happening on the left was mirroring what was happening with Trump on the right. And that was actually my big regret from looking at my program. What I saw in the transcripts was, wow, we were really skeptical of Trump, really critical. And I think that's true across television news, honestly. A lot of tough coverage of Trump, skeptical, scrutiny. However, if you look at the attention economy, just giving him attention, even negative attention, may have boosted him. And your point about the rallies is well taken.
People wanted to see what he was going to say next and what he was going to do next. And nobody wanted to miss it. And you didn't want to be the network who was going to miss it, right?
So can I put that on Ted Cruz and Hillary Clinton and John Kasich? And why weren't they having primetime rallies? Now, we can argue all day that maybe candidates shouldn't be out there on the stump for 18 months, and maybe the election should be shorter, and maybe campaign finance shouldn't be so monstrous, and maybe, et cetera. But given the structure of American elections, I was always surprised that others didn't learn from Trump and didn't start doing what he was doing. And the primetime rallies was like the biggest thing. I kept thinking, why isn't Ted Cruz having a primetime rally? Because he knows that if he gets up there and surprises us, he's going to dominate the news. And it seemed to me that because Trump was this new breed, this creature we hadn't seen before on the campaign trail, nobody knew what to do or how to respond. And I think in 2020, not going to happen, right? We're going to see a lot of candidates learn from his model. We're going to see TV stars running for president. We're going to see primetime rallies. Who knows what the next innovation will be that Trump won't think of. It seems
when
to
you
me
say
that,
learn from his model, you just mean in terms of how to get media attention, right? Or
I think there's a lot of things he was
that
doing.
People don't want to see modeled.
I agree with that, but there was a look. I'm like a lot of people. I watched a lot of those rallies, mesmerized. I'm not embarrassed to say I was watching not necessarily what he was saying, but how he was saying it, the way he was connecting to his audience, the way he was playing to the cameras. We can bemoan that all day, but in some ways, I view Trump as the inevitable conclusion of 50 years of television as the dominant medium in the world. And we've moved on now to phones and to the internet, and let's see what kind of candidates come from decades of digital existence. But this is why I'm so interested in the possibility of Oprah in 2020.
You think she said she's not going to?
She's also said that her friends are asking her to run, and Gail says she can always change her mind. Let's see what happens this time next year. Look, I think a lot of people who have television experience are going to try to apply that to politics now, because whether that makes them the best candidates or not, whether that makes them appropriate presidents or not, there is a connection they have on a human level to the public that I could kind of feel in 2016, but I only really appreciated when he won.
You have said...
But then he also made up a lot of fake things, and that we can get into all of the problems at those rallies. But I just think from a television perspective...
No, he's good TV.
Visually...
There's no question he grasps it, he gets it. I hope we're not entering an era when billionaires and TV stars are the only ones who we think are, right to be in positions of leadership. I think that's a really dangerous road to go down, and I think President Trump's presidency is dangerous not only for the United States but for the whole world because he's so unpredictable. So that's just
it may well zig back in that direction.
Yeah, I hope we have a correction that people begin to realize actually you need something to believe in. You need to stand for things. You need to take positions and then understand what they are and why you're taking them and all of that. And I'm not sure that happens right now.
I wonder if the slogan is going to be "Make America Sane Again." Is it going to be "Make America Smart Again," or is it going to be "Make America Boring Again"? Because it's going to be one of the It's going to be one of those combinations as a reaction to this.
Right. You said, I think it may have been on your show on Sunday, that viewers and readers should refuse to be confused. Which is a great thing to say.
Easy to say, hard to do.
And we would love to do that, but how do you do it? How do you sift through all of the stuff that is out there, especially coming from Washington, and determine, just as an average viewer reader, not someone who's like us, totally plugged in all the time, what's important and what's not.
Yeah.
And who do you trust as a reliable source?
Yeah. The fundamental question of my program, I think, is if everything's a source, what's reliable, right? If companies are sources now, nonprofits are sources, politicians act like sources, everybody's acting like a news source, right? Every company has become a media company, and every public figure is trying to put out their version of the news. And then you layer on top of that partisan sources, hyper-partisan sources, conspiratorial websites, and propaganda arms, and it makes you want to tune out of all of it entirely. I think a big part of the answer has to do with, I'm going to sound like my dad or something. Old-fashioned news sources, ones that have been around for a long time, that have a track record that you can show. And actually, Facebook recently has started doing this. If you see a link in your news feed and it has a source like CNN, you can click on that link and it'll tell you about the source. It'll tell you the history of the source. CNN was founded in 1980, and it'll give you a little history. It'll give you some comments about the source. Look, Facebook's got a long ways to go, but I can see them trying to give people some information about sources, so that if it says, just to pick on Breitbart, because that's easy to do, Breitbart, it's going to tell you the history or lack thereof of a website like that. So I think that's a big part of the answer. I think a big part of the answer is also in slowing down the news consumption or news cycle, which is impossible. Yes. I know, but
is it impossible? Is it?
Well,
I'm not sure that it is, and I wonder if people aren't hungry for that.
I think many are, and so two things. Briefly on the train crash today, for example, early reports that were not quite right. Then came conspiracy theories that were insane. And now, 8 hours later, we finally kind of know what happened. And now is probably the right time to read the story or to watch the report about it. And I think, we as I think newsrooms, we need to be producing news in real time for people. But I think on the consumption side, an encouragement of kind of slow news, of checking back, seeing if something was confirmed, checking back later, is crucial. And then the bigger point, to your point about the audience wanting information once it's been digested and curated, we need more products and more creativity and more innovation from newsrooms and from startups and from journalists and from wannabe journalists who want to break into the business. I'm amazed there haven't been more startups in the U.S. from the ashes of the election. If one of the outcomes of the election was a lot of soul-searching and a lot of promises to do better and to understand the country and to be more open-minded, I'm surprised there haven't been more new newsrooms, new brands, new apps, new, this or that to capitalize on that energy. I think that's an opportunity for any of us in this room or in other rooms to make something new, to start I have a nightly newsletter, but start a morning newsletter that tries to be a slimmed down, digested, slow news product. A summary of the world. I would love a 400-word email at 8 p.m. that says, "Here's everything that happened with President Trump today," And no matter what, we're going to keep it to 400 words because your time's precious. Like there are those kinds of concepts, and I'm sure someone's doing that, and if so, send me the link. But I think there's a lot of room for creation and innovation right now in this space. Not just on, subscription models, but on the editorial side.
Well, we were talking before we started here about different ways of doing things, and we were talking about Axios, which is very popular. Maybe you can explain a little bit about what it is, but its mission is smart brevity.
Right, and Mike Allen, who was at Politico, is now at Axios, has a morning newsletter almost always around 6:30 on weekdays. At Politico, he was famous for a very long newsletter. At Axios, it's very short. It's 10 items. It's very consistent, and it's written for C-suite executives and for White House aides. But as a result, I feel like I need to read it too, and that's one of many examples. But I think what they're going for is shorter is not just better. Shorter is necessary. That there's an audience that wants and needs concise information. Now, I think the flip side of that would be the New Yorker and the Atlantic and other sites that are investing in long form and have been going on hiring sprees lately, and that's great to see as well. So there's room for all, hopefully.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned them, because what seems to be happening is that young people want are turning to old legacy media in increasing numbers. And the 18 to 34, there's a survey that Reuters does. They do an annual summary of the state of the media in the world. And what they've discovered is that young subscribers are actually flocking to old media, and that publications like The New Yorker, as you mentioned, and The Atlantic, The New Yorker had a 106% increase in subscriptions in people aged 18 to 34 in 2017. Atlantic had similar numbers. Even the Wall Street Journal, which is not considered, you wouldn't think too many 18-year-olds are picking that up, but they are. And not only picking it up, but paying for it, which is interesting. And that's something else I want to get to, is the idea of paying for news. When I go talk to journalism classes, and I always say, don't expect to get quality news for free. The business model is broken, the traditional business model. You need to pay for it the way, we used to buy a newspaper or subscribe to a newspaper. And increasingly, I think that's the direction that certainly the New York Times, the Washington Post, I think the Washington Post has reduced the number of free articles you can get before you have to subscribe, that we can't expect to get deep dives and investigative journalism and thorough journalism without having to pay a little bit for it.
And the Post, I must have hit the Post paywall 100 times. And I'd be hitting the door, giving up. It's like, trying to get to a party, and it's like, I don't really want to go that badly. But finally I gave in, and I paid, and I'm glad I did. And the one kind of asterisk to that is, it's got to be easier to pay. These companies, these newsrooms have to keep making it easier to pay. Bezos owns Amazon and the Post, and it's still not easy enough to pay for the Post. And so I think that's an ongoing challenge on the TV side, but especially on the print side or digital side. Got to make it easier to be able to sign up. But I have confidence these companies are going to get there. I'm very worried about smaller outlets and local outlets, and whether that's a model for them as well. But certainly on a national scale and a regional scale, there's a lot of reasons to be hopeful about that. And I think when you're a subscriber, or to use another word, a member, when you feel like you are a part of it, I think that also engenders trust. When you think you're a part, when you feel that you're a part of this news operation, or that you're supporting this news operation, you're going to be more disappointed when it screws up. You're going to be more proud when it succeeds. You're going to be more proud when it breaks news, or has a big scoop, or creates change in your community. So there's a sort of a benefit, I think, from the subscription model as well, that creates hopefully more trust in news. Now, it doesn't solve the what about the extremists who are anti-journalism, who want to hate news outlets. It doesn't convert them necessarily, but it does get more members of a community involved in the news. And I think that's a part of where we need to go, is a feeling of more participation. If you've never been interviewed by a journalist, right, you probably have no idea how we do what we do, like how we do our jobs. And you might think the worst about, because the president says that we make up sources. But if you've had a positive experience with a journalist, or at least you're paying for your local outlet and it hasn't screwed up in a big way lately, then you're probably going to have a more positive relationship. And I think there's something to that cycle.
Let me ask you about the role of the media in the polarization, the kind of tribal thing that we're seeing in the United States now, the filter bubbles, the feedback loops and all of that. The people only really listen to people who have like-minded views and support what they think, and it just feeds on itself. Is the media in the United States complicit in that, part of that? And is it time that we start to cross-pollinate and start to listen to people whose views we don't agree with?
Yeah, I would say media is a big word, so I would delineate a little bit. The kind of the existence and the worsening of these like filter bubbles, these echo chambers. It is caused by certain business models and certain giant media and tech companies, right? And that includes Facebook, and it includes, radio conglomerates. I would throw in 21st Century Fox with Murdoch, with Fox News. And I would also delineate, kind of what are the purposes of these various outlets. So what I see right now in the U.S., I see a pro-Trump media, right? An explicitly pro-Trump booster media, and that includes a lot of Fox, not all of it, a lot of Fox, Hannity, Limbaugh, the Breitbarts. It includes those usual suspects of sort of clearly pro-Trump media. And then you have like a really kind of a smaller bubble, like a truly anti-Trump media. These are actually liberal news outlets, right? These are The Nation and Salon. These are, and there's not as many of them, and they're not as powerful, but they exist, right? Rachel Maddow, right? Anti-Trump. They are counting down to impeachment. And then in between, you have like a lot of other stuff, right? And that's, your program. It's my program. It's CNN. It's all those big news outlets. The New York Times of the world. The Wall Street Journals. Some of them, you might see bias or a partisan slant, but they're trying to find out the facts and figure out what's going on and call it like it is. They're not explicitly pro or anti-Trump. And certainly, when it comes to these bubbles and this kind of desire for an echo chamber, pro and anti-Trump media outlets do benefit from that and foster that environment and both contribute to it and exacerbate it. And then on top of that, Facebook and Twitter do by echoing and echoing and echoing. But I think you have to, I think it's worth breaking out real newsrooms that are trying to be in the middle.
But so if either of the, so I would say, forgive me, but when I watch CNN, I don't see a lot of pro-Trump stuff on there. But, I think
But I'm putting it in the, I'm not saying it's pro or anti, I'm saying it's in the middle.
Okay, fair enough.
You think it's anti-Trump?
Well, yes, more so than not. Yeah. But
Can I suggest a different frame and see if it holds up?
Sure.
Is CNN trying to be pro-decency and pro-truth?
Yes, I would say. I would argue that most journalists are.
And on a day when the president is honest and decent, is the channel anti-Trump sounding? I think that's where it gets complicated.
The State of the Union and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I thought he gave a speech that was like kind of inspiring, but then also polarizing, and then also at times full of falsehoods. So it was complicated, right? And we should say there were inspiring parts that made me proud to be an American. And unfortunately, all of that context or nuance gets lost, maybe.
Yeah.
Because the headline is, he's ticked off at Rosenstein, and we don't know what Ray's going to do about this memo, and Mueller's bringing in Mark Corallo. Every day there is a sense that he's in a more and more precarious situation. And, I think to me that's the biggest story in the country right now, is the crisis of the Trump White House. And I can understand why that focus comes across as negative or anti-Trump. But to me, that means we're trying to cover the biggest story that's going on.
It's also at the
expense. Do I sound like I'm spinning you?
No. I get that. I'm not trying to
get my head around it.
I'm not trying to attack CNN. I do think it's at the expense of everything else that's going on in the world, which is I think one of the issues of the United States is it becomes more and more insular, right? Less interested in looking at the rest of the world and trying to understand the rest of the world and see what's going on there. And when you watch, when I was a correspondent for NBC News, there was a lot more foreign coverage. Not as much as I think there should have been, but there was more than there is now. And I think that's the case on cable news networks too. Just more of a shrinking that it's the biggest story in the world, sure, President Trump, but at the expense of everything else. And there's some dangerous.
I think you think my answer is unsatisfying, right? Because my answer is it's on the website, and that's not a very satisfying answer to you.
Well, so we were talking about this before. So Brian said you can get all that stuff online. Yeah.
Well, because to me the phone it's changed what you can do on TV. Because on the phone if we were to invent the best product to get the news, we all have it now. It's in our hands. We have the best way possible, in my mind, to get all the information you could possibly want in your world, and I think that makes the TV product different. But that's just my vantage point as an anchor, and I personally, when I'm home at 6:30, I watch one of the nightly newscasts because it still is the closest thing
Which
to. I tend toward NBC actually, but I sample all of them. Because I actually do have that desire for sometimes just the packages about what happened today. What's funny? In 2004, I launched my blog about TV news when I was in college, because I was just a TV news junkie. And if in 2004 you and I made a bet that the nightly newscast in the United States would still have 25 million viewers in 2018, I would have laughed. I would have bet you $1,000 that there was no chance of that. And sure enough, it's remarkable how strong these nightly newscasts still are, that there's still an audience, and I know the audience skews older, but that's okay. It's a big audience for these nightly newscasts.
It is, and those are people who I think because we're so caught in the daily, in the minute
daily
by
grind.
minute, that there are people who don't live lives like that, and they rely on newscasts like ours and others and newspapers to actually fully understand the events of the day.
Yeah,
right? And
they want those products,
I wanted to ask you about the segment that I don't know if you ever got to, about Rupert Murdoch saying Facebook should pay for news.
There's always next week.
It's a great topic. It is. So where do you think that, what do you think about Facebook these days as a media company, which it says it's not?
You know, my phone died on Tuesday, or on Monday, actually. My phone died on Monday. My iPhone, my trusty, phone. It had only lived for like 15 months, and it just died. And for 24 hours, I had no phone. And it was amazing. It was so freeing. It was so, there were only a few times that I started shaking about it. And eventually, I went to the Apple store, and I, bowed down, and I spent my $1,500, and I got my new phone. And now I'm back, like everybody else. But those 24 hours were honestly helpful because it was a chance to think about, not having Facebook in the palm of my hand the whole time, not having Twitter in the palm of my hand all the time. And I think it kind of, throughout society, we're having that moment right now where we're evaluating the pros and cons of these social networks. We're thinking about what they're doing to us and how they're taking advantage of us and how we're benefiting from them and suffering from them. And I think it's an overdue evaluation. I'm glad it's happening right now. It happened a little bit around the Russia propaganda. It's happened around the effects of technology on children. It's happening in several different places. And I think what Rupert did, and I'm glad he did it, was just to put a wild idea out there on the table and say, okay, what if we could just redesign this from scratch? Wouldn't Facebook pay a carriage fee for news? So I appreciate the audacity of it. Let's think about what Facebook's role in society is. What kind of contribution could they be making? Are we providing content for free? We can rattle off all the reasons why it won't happen. But I think it's worth having those, I think it's worth throwing those crazy ideas out, right? Why isn't there a $1 surcharge on everybody's phone bill that goes toward news? Why isn't there government support for news in the U.S. the way there is in Canada and other countries? I can answer all the reasons why, but I think it's worth having the dialogue, and so I'm glad Murdoch put it out there. And Facebook is in like the second inning of this reevaluation of themselves. Mm-hmm. Who knows where they're going to end up by the end of the game?
Well, and the dark side of social media has really been exposed in 2017, right? Both Facebook and Twitter, and exploited by the Russians from spreading misinformation, disinformation, really helping to erode social cohesion in the United States. It's a dangerous road. I wonder if it can be fixed and whether social media can be a force for good, if all of that can be eliminated.
Don't you feel like people are pulling back a little bit, meaning maybe sharing a little bit less, maybe because they're trusting a little bit less? Maybe they're sharing with friends only, sharing with family only. I mean, that's certainly what I'm seeing just anecdotally. People are being social and using social networks, but, via text message or via Instagram, which is like a safer space for family. It makes me wonder what Facebook looks like in 10 years. Mm-hmm. I would never count Facebook out. It's too big. It has too much information. But the idea of MySpace becoming that dying shell of a mall is something that stays with me. That it can happen almost overnight. So I wonder if we're going to see more. And again, there might be openings there for newsrooms or opening there for media companies to create products that feel safer. Feel more trustworthy, that feel more reliable. You could imagine a social network where there's a brand promise that you're never going to come across a nutty conspiracy theory on this site. I don't know how you'd build it, but that's why I'm not a Mark Zuckerberg.
I want to ask you, Brian, about the demise of local news. It's happening in the United States. It's happening here. Countless TV stations and small newspapers across the country are shutting down, have shut down. Civic politics are no longer covered in the way they were. Local courts are not covered in the way they were. A lot of people think that's bad for democracy. What are your thoughts?
You know, this is why we need bold ideas. This is why we need to talk about a Facebook funding model, even though it may be a moonshot, or other sorts of subscription models, or kind of community financing models. You know, I think a lot of the innovation we see now is in nonprofit newsrooms, sometimes financed by billionaires and millionaires in a community, or foundation models. And these are all worthwhile efforts. They're all worthwhile trials. I think it's, you know, it's remarkable and sad that there's not, you know, in New York City where I live, in the neighborhood where I live, a way to find out what those sirens were an hour ago, or why a helicopter's circling. That there's not that kind of hyper-local solution, even in a big city, where there are newsrooms covering the big city. There aren't those hyper-local solutions. But at the risk of putting it too much on the consumers, I think a big chunk of this is on the audience, is on the public, is on the local community. You know, I think about the town I grew up in, where there was really only one reporter, and everybody in town knew her and loved her, and sadly that paper no longer exists. But there's still a need for that reporter and a need for that community information. And you know, I would love to imagine models where people are coming together to reestablish those outlets, you know, on a kind of on a very local grassroots level. Because if there's one thing we've sort of learned in the last few years, it's that these solutions from on high aren't working. The Troncs of the world, can't believe we're even using that name for Tribune. You know, that these Tronc-like companies or Patch-like companies, you know, owned by AOL, that they don't seem to have the solution that they can cast across the nation. That it's going to have to be more grassroots level.
We want to open the floor to questions in just a minute, but you started on an optimistic note, and I want to try to end on one.
Yeah, I got lots more optimism.
Oh, good. So you have an 8-month-old. I have a 13-year-old. I like to think that I'm a bit of a Pollyanna, and I think that my son is more worldly than I was at his age. He's more traveled. He's more well-informed. He has access to all kinds of information that I never had when I was his age. I think his critical thinking skills are better than mine at that age. So I'm pretty optimistic that his generation will be able to rise out of the confusion and uncertainty we seem to be in right now. I'm not sure how, of course, but I think they're smart enough to do it. If you looked in a crystal ball, Brian, and looked ahead to the media landscape in the next decade, 20 years, what do you see?
I don't want to give it away. I want to go make it. I want to go build it. I share your optimism because I'm a kid who couldn't be here without these digital tools. You know, I was so lucky to be born at this moment in time where I could learn code and build a website and put it out there on the web and get people to link to me and get people to read it and get people to subscribe and donate money and write about it and make it into a business. That ability to have everyone be a publisher is so radical. It's still so radical, right? 15, 20 years later, it's such a revolution that we're living through with this, you know, digital technology. And I'm sort of almost scared to think what my daughter will be able to do with it in ways that I can't. If I was able to teach myself basic HTML code, I assume she'll be teaching herself whatever is after augmented reality, whatever that is after that. My only hope is that, you know, we use these to understand each other and not to divide each other further. Because right now, some of these technologies are being best used by folks that know how to exploit it.
For sure.
And so that's a challenge for the rest of us, really. But, you know, I look at the last year, I think about what didn't happen. And this is, you know, look, Trump's words against the media are absolutely poisonous. They are a slow-acting poison that is causing an infection. But at the same time, the White House press briefing room was not shut down. And the press were not booted off of the front lawn of the White House. Newspapers were not sued, and journalists were not sued under libel laws by President Trump. He did make a threat against the author of Fire and Fury, And the book became the biggest book in the nation, biggest book in the world. There are a lot of kind of the greatest fears of the last 12 months that have not come to pass. And doesn't mean journalists shouldn't be vigilant. It doesn't mean media lawyers are not being vigilant, because they certainly are. Media lawyers have been very busy. But I think it's worth recognizing what the reaction to Trump's rhetoric has been on the positive side, which has been so much support for journalism, so much interest in journalism, so many people wondering about our jobs and how we do them. And when I see him tweet out about fake sources, made up sources, and when I'm putting my tie on, going to work, and like putting my makeup on and getting ready to go on air, he's given me a chance to explain how sourcing works. He's given me a chance to explain how a story is vetted ahead of time. Even when ABC's Brian Ross screwed up about that report about Michael Flynn, it was a chance to explain why those screw-ups are so rare and how anonymous sourcing is usually approved ahead of time. Not saying I'm thankful for Trump's attacks, but it is an opportunity to reaffirm what we actually do for a living.
All right, that's some nice optimism.
All right, there we go.
All right. So now get up to the microphone. Anyone who has some tough questions for Brian. Hey, if you could just say who you are and where you're from, that'd be terrific.
Hi, Brian. My name's Scott White. I'm editor of The Conversation Canada. When do you sleep?
How many times have you been asked that, Brian?
It's funny. More than a few. All right, I shouldn't tell you this, but I actually sleep a lot. I sleep like 9-10 hours a night when I can. But I try to look like I'm always online. That's my.
You are always online.
That's my secret. I try to buffer tweets and tape my look lives on TV for the middle of the night, and what do I do? When I'm awake in the middle of the night, when Sunny is awake in the middle of the night, dash off an email at 3 a.m. to your colleagues. They think you're online all night. Some of those tricks. What I do love about CNN, especially at the New York Times, I didn't know this when I was at the Times, but the Times, I was always sort of at 50. From 100 to 0, I was always at like kind of a 50. It was pretty predictable. And at CNN, I find it's either 100 or 0. Like right now I'm 0. I'm not doing live shots. Things are cool. It's all Mueller today. It's all FBI today. Like, I'm off, basically, right? And then when something happens, and I'm at 100, and it looks like I'm never sleeping, it's an adrenaline rush. It's great for a news junkie. You come back from New Year's, Fire and Fury happens on day 3. It was like off to the races. And then as soon as Fire and Fury slowed down, that news cycle slowed down 3 days later, Oprah at the Golden Globes. Awesome. And there's 2 more days of nonstop. But when you're at 100 at CNN, it's going to come back down to 0. And you're not going to be in demand as much a couple days from now. So I've come to ride those waves. I used to hate it, when I started CNN, that it was always higher, low. Now I've come to really appreciate the ups and downs. And I moved like really, really close to work, partly for that reason.
How
so
close,
I can run back and
how
forth.
How close are you? You're like
I'm so close that I can see inside the building. Which is awesome. So listen, this doesn't happen every day, but like when Anthony Scaramucci resigned, I missed almost all of Scaramucci. I was on vacation for like Scaramucci's entire tenure. So, and it was so disappointing. So I get back from Arizona, and it's like, it's my first day back at work. Nothing was going on. I went home to have lunch with my wife, and my daughter was like 2 months old at the time. I was changing Sonny's diaper, and my phone starts buzzing because Scaramucci just resigned. And I swear, I kid you not, I was on air in 8 minutes. It was awesome. It doesn't happen. I did finish the diaper.
The diaper? Okay,
yes.
good.
No, I put it in the diaper genie. But then I was on in 8 minutes. And that doesn't happen every day, but when it does, it's pretty great.
I'm any media executives listening to this, don't get any ideas that we should all live like within sight of the office. I
fully plan to live out in the suburbs. But here's the thing, right? In 10 years, don't you think Skype's going to be so high quality that we're all going to be at home? Yeah. Who knows? I mean, who knows?
Hi, my name is, whoa, that's too hot. Hi, my name is Aaron. I'm a writer for the Beaverton, and I also suggest everyone from the here also see the Beaverton panel that's going to be happening later on this month.
Cool.
Nice plug. Nice.
Yeah, nice plug. My question has to do with the metaphor of the media diet that you gave. What does a balanced media diet look like for the regular person? And are you trustworthy as someone who is a self-professed media junkie? I'm just kidding there. And yeah, does fake news play a part in that diet?
Yeah. So I think about a media diet, there's a lot of ways to approach it. I think about it mostly as the types of content you're consuming. I think an all, listen, to my bosses, cover your ears, I don't think an all cable news diet is necessarily healthy, nor do I think an all New York Times diet is healthy. I think a balanced diet is partly that you're watching a bit, you're reading a bit, you're listening a bit. I think I'd probably put some podcast into that diet if I could come up with the perfect menu. I would encourage a little bit of Hannity, a little bit of Rush maybe, a little bit of Mark Stein. I heard him on earlier in the bathroom. Don't know why, but I heard his voice all of a sudden. I do think it's important to be hearing what the right-wing echo chamber is promoting, because it is an alternative reality. There isn't a version of that as powerful on the left in the U.S., but I would certainly add in some, truly liberal media, some truly, some of that as well. But primarily, I think about it as a kind of as mediums. You want to be reading articles from newspapers, but I think you also want to be watching some of the coverage on TV. I think the way that stories are covered emotionally, the emotional resonance of, if you had only been reading about Donald Trump during the campaign, never seen him on television, you had a very different sense of what was going on. So I think of the media diet partly as mediums you're consuming, partly as that ideology, that kind of partisanship, consuming outlets that are trying to persuade you as well as outlets that are trying to inform you. And then I think we would go to what we were talking about earlier about a slower news, sort of something that's been pre-chewed for you, right? Digested ahead of time, a weekly or monthly magazine. In my old age up here, I'm trying to read more books, because I think that I can hopefully bring to viewers on Sunday something that's a little more thoughtful and thought through about the world. So I think about the diet mostly that way.
Hi, my name is Stuart. I'm in the corporate PR world. If I can ask one short question and just a bit of a longer one, how much of Trump's fake news tweets do you think are more kind of reflex that he just likes to pick fights versus something calculated to set a foundation for when whatever comes out from Mueller or whatever, that it's not to be believed? And I just want to pick up on one thing you mentioned earlier from your show this past week, where it's easy to get caught up in his latest feud with whoever. And when he made the comment about Jay-Z and black unemployment, you had Van Jones on, and you showed a very interesting chart tracking unemployment rates, white and black unemployment rates.
Yeah.
And I forget if it was you who made the point or he did about it's not just a matter of the unemployment rates have been falling for a while, but there's a disparity in the two rates, and that's a story worth pursuing. And those kind of things can get lost in debating who is he taking a shot at recently. Right. So I just want to get
that's why I put that chart up. I was like, we're going to do, here was my honest thought process. It's 10 a.m., we're on in an hour, I get an hour to play with, what are we going to do? If we're going to react to a Trump tweet, then let's at least talk about the real data, and let's show what I wish Trump would tweet about, which would be, rather than taking all the credit for what has been seven years of improvement in the unemployment rate, let's address the disparity between black and white unemployment rate. That's the story, that's the focus. So thank you for noticing that. It is very much an impulse of, okay, if I'm going to have this airtime, I don't just want to be a part of the food fight. I don't just want to contribute to that sense. And I'll be the first to admit, some days I get it right, some days I get it wrong. But that's at least the hope. I think to your point about Trump's tweets and his use of the word fake, what's he doing? What's the goal? What's the intent? He's used the word fake more than 400 times in his first year in office. About half on Twitter, half at rallies and speeches and interviews. So more than once a day on average. And it usually comes in bursts. Like, he'll say it 10 times, you know, and then maybe not for a week. And then he'll get ticked off again. He'll say it again 10 times. I think I subscribe to the view it's mostly venting. I don't subscribe to the view that this is all strategic and well thought through. But I do think a little bit of it is strategic, you know. I don't know, maybe 1 out of every 10 tweets is a strategy. But most of it feels off the cuff. My best memory of a Trump tweet, January 2nd last year. He's a president-elect. I'm on air talking about, Trump, and we mentioned that CNN's publishing a book about the election. And we put the book up on screen. Unprecedented, you know, it's this great-looking book about the president. He didn't like the cover picture. He didn't like the picture of himself on the cover. So he tweeted out complaints about the cover and how they chose the worst picture of me. And that was one of those rare times where it was really obvious that he was tweeting about my segment on CNN. It turned out we'd had a photo shoot. We'd already shot another picture of him. It was going to be on the next edition of the book. So there he goes, selling, I guess, selling some copies of the book. But it is a weird experience, you know, to have that feedback loop where you know that he's watching and you know that he cares enough about it to tweet about it. And we can fall prey to that. We can fall, victim to that in a way that's not useful, or we can make the most of it. And when he tweets something about African-American athletes, that is a window into a conversation about racism that's really valuable. I think Trump forces us to have conversations about the most important, profound issues in American life. We're talking about race and class and gender and citizenship and what it means to be an American. And if we can use the time wisely on air, I think that can be a net positive. It doesn't have to be just a food fight and back and forth and both sides. We can have some really we can do some good out of some of this darkness. Are you about to tell me that I'm full of crap and this is totally too positive?
No, not at all. I was going to say, here's to more of that in 2018,
right? Right, exactly. Yeah. And less of the, you said, no, he said it, right.
Hey, but I did want to ask you about something you mentioned. It tweaked my mind. In the interview that you did with Michael Wolff, did that give Michael Wolff the entree?
We should talk about Michael Wolff.
Yes, because you were interviewing him, and apparently Trump was watching, and
I'll tell you all
Wolff
the story.
said some pretty, what did he call you? An opportunist?
He called me a ridiculous figure.
There you go.
Which trolls still tweet back at me. This is great. I'll tell you the 30-second story. So Wolff was already sucking up to get access before I came along. He interviewed Kellyanne Conway. He interviewed Steve Bannon. He did these really nice. They weren't totally puff pieces, but they were nice profiles for the Hollywood Reporter before Inauguration Day. But then after Inauguration Day, he was trying to weasel his way into the White House, and he started taking shots at me in his columns for Newsweek, which was cute. And we wanted to have him on anyway, but when we had him on, we put he attacked me in his column. I put it on screen, asked him about it. He made fun of me some more. He attacked the media in general. He basically said we were all negative and nasty toward Trump. We were acting like it was 1930s in Germany or something. We were overreacting to the president, new president. And it was pretty obvious what he was doing, right? He was treating himself as I'm on your side to the White House, and the rest of them are out to get you. It's pretty obvious, and I think I said in the interview, you're just sucking up to get access, right? Well, it turns out the next day, President Trump called him.
It worked.
They had a 25-minute long conversation. Wolff vented about CNN and everything else, blah, blah, blah. Trump vented to Wolff about all sorts of things. And after that phone call, Wolff had more access to the White House. I think as long as people saw what it was, I think as long as you're able to discern what he was doing, cool, great, good for him. I could sit up here all day and talk about how sleazy it was and how much of a weasel he was and how natty, but as long as people recognize it for what it was, I think that's, hopefully the outcome. And to me, it was pretty clear at the time, he was bashing the media in order to cozy up to the White House. I don't know if he always intended to write a book about the White House trashing them, or if he wanted to get inside and tell the real story of a, accomplished, calm, rational, sane president. I don't know if that was his plan, and it somewhere along the way it went off the rails. But
like day one.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and maybe he, maybe he was planning to be the one journalist to tell the truth about Trump, but obviously he only confirmed and affirmed what other reporters have been saying for months.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm a documentary producer. My films have been on TVO, CBC, PBS. I want to broaden the context just a little bit. People have talked about what's our media diet. You talked about how we can get all the information now on our phones. I'd like to argue that I think there's still a huge gap. This is a city that's 50% people of color. That is not reflected in this room. It's not reflected in the decision-making centers of power in our journalism and media worlds by any means. We are far from that.
Yeah.
And I think I'm very curious to know, as someone who fights for this endlessly, because I have to, I'm wondering what are you doing to fight for a greater range of, especially racially diverse voices in your team, in your newsrooms, larger at CNN, and perhaps fighting for that across the journalism field as a whole. I think if we really did that, much like the Hollywood so white, I would say journalism so white as well, at least in North America. I think a lot of the other pieces that we've been touching upon today would naturally start to be addressed, and I think we would then see where we really would go in 10 years.
I think what you said is more eloquent than what I would say about it, but I agree with the way you're framing it. I think the CNN diversity officer would have a stronger answer about the whole company, but I know that in my part of the company, we pretty explicitly talk about diversity on the program, in terms of gender, racial, ideological, et cetera. And I'm pretty blunt with the maybe too blunt with the staff about this show looks too white. And this, and actually the bigger problem we have is about gender, because we're trying to book journalism leaders, which sometimes means like the heads of newsrooms, which are predominantly male and white. And so we find ourselves having to try to adjust, because newsrooms have this problem in a systemic way, and we're trying to book the heads of newsrooms. We need to adapt or adjust for that. So I guess the answer about our program is that it's a conversation we have in our booking meetings on Wednesdays and Thursdays and Fridays as we're producing the show. And I'll absolutely admit that we don't get it right, especially not every week. But it is a constant topic of conversation, as it needs to be. And as for the rest of CNN, it's certainly a priority of the head of CNN.
Yeah, I would agree that it is a priority. It's a conversation we all have all the time. I think, I was the first woman to be a national news anchor in Canada. And when I got hired, it seemed to be, I remember being asked all kinds of questions like, how are you going to handle childcare and being an anchor? And sort of crazy questions that now you wouldn't, and that was only 7 years ago. And I said, it should have been a woman a long time ago. There are plenty of qualified women who could have had this job and just didn't. Now, and I think the same obviously goes for diversity. And we need to work far harder at it than is happening now. And I think you're right that things would begin to change. The conversation changes, the inputs change, the perspective changes when you have a more diverse group, for sure.
I mean, men, talking about Me Too currently, men need to be part of the Me Too conversation. But there's been some times I've said, actually, please don't book me for that conversation, even though I'm supposed to be the media reporter at CNN.
Another
There's
white
some
guy,
better,
right?
There's
Yes.
some better women at the company that can talk about that. So I just think it's a lot. These diversity conversations, a lot of them are about leadership in newsrooms and about what the CEOs and newsroom leaders are doing. But it's also just a daily editorial, right? Hour by hour conversation, on an individual basis of what's best for this story.
Go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name's Rick Spence. I write a business column for the National Post. We've talked about the polarization of the American electorate that's certainly been proven in the last few elections. But as you refer to with that other Bernie Sanders story, it's really a fragmentation. We're seeing these groups develop without the agreed facts. Do you see any media that are actually successfully finding a way to bridge these gaps? Is there any way of trying to reforge consensus and connect these isolated realities?
My short answer is no,
Oh,
not
come on,
one that I
was
can
hoping for an
particularly come up
optimist.
with. The longer attempt at an answer would be that I liked that the New York Times published a page full of letters from Trump supporters a couple weeks ago. I like that CNN has focus groups with Trump supporters, but also with black women in Atlanta who probably did not vote for Trump recently. I like that the Washington Post and the Atlantic recently did Clinton voter stories. You know, I like all of these stabs at the issue, but I think what you're describing is a news source that would be equally trusted by a Fox News loyalist and a Maddow loyalist. And I don't see that source. I think the data would suggest that the Wall Street Journal and the AP and Reuters might be close to that mark, but aren't there. I think, historically we would cite some of those outlets as being the closest to it. But let's not tiptoe around it. What's happened on the right, there has been an extremism in terms of the media, in terms of the pro-Trump media, that has, Sean Hannity every night says journalism's dead and you can't trust a word of it, that we're liars, and he sometimes says, his guests say we're un-American. That's causing extremism, and there is not something as extreme on the left. There are some anti-media voices for sure on the other side, but what those pro-Trump voices are doing is destabilizing, and I think a lot of the reaction to it has been to try to be more assertive about the truth and try to put the facts out there and pop his conspiracy theory bubbles. Anderson Cooper did a great essay last week where he debunked a couple of Hannity's conspiracy theories, kind of line by line. How to get his viewers to watch Anderson's debunking, though, is the great both business model problem and societal problem. And I wish I had a better answer.
Thank you.
To your question.
Hi, I'm Robert. I'm an undergraduate student in statistics. And I wanted to ask you a bit more about Twitter. We've mentioned the context of Russia and the context of its potentially corrosive effect on public discourse. And I'm very curious, I've been having a bit of an argument with my dad over there. And I'm curious about its effect on sort of your job as a journalist and journalism as a whole. There's the case of like Dave Weigel, where one erroneous tweet gets blown up on the presidential Twitter page. And then there's people like Maggie Haberman, where you read one of her stories, you go to her Twitter feed, and you learn 10 more things about whatever's going on. How do you feel it's changed sort of your role and kind of the role of journalists as a whole?
I'm tweeting right now. I'm just getting a couple of retweets off. Seriously. So the answer, here's one possible answer. Let's think about what does Twitter do for individual journalists? How does it change our roles? You might think of someone like me, or if I want to be humble, let's think of Maggie Haberman. Let's think of what Maggie's doing is Maggie is on a quest. Maggie's on a quest to figure out what's going on up here in President Trump's brain. And she's the best at it as anybody, right? She's the closest to figuring it out. And think of what we do as consumers as subscribing to go on the quest with her. On her Twitter feed, in the newspaper, on the website, and on her CNN hits. We are with Maggie on this quest to figure it out. And we may never figure it out. But Maggie's gonna try. And I think, we can think about a lot of reporters' beats that way, both on a national level and on a local level, right? The Indianapolis Star being a recent example of reporters who were on a quest to expose abuse in USA Gymnastics. But there are lots and lots of examples of this. And I think Twitter is a really key part of that. If you think about reporters being on a quest, and we are going on that with them, first of all, that changes your thinking about newsrooms, because you're not signing up for a brand, you're signing up for an individual. And I think Twitter has accelerated that movement. You go back 10 years when Twitter was new and it was this hot, flashy thing, and journalists were trying to figure out how to use it. It was a profound change in newsrooms, because I was able to publish myself without my New York Times editor being involved first. My mentor, David Carr, and I had lots of conversations about this, because Twitter was really changing the power dynamic in newsrooms. And it was making these individual brands, these personal brands, these stars into something. And it was taking power away from news brands. I think 10 years later, it's shaken out a little bit. We see that balance. People are signing up both for news brands and for individuals. But, that's kind of how I think about it. Twitter is a way for me to go on a journey with someone like Maggie or with someone like Dave Weigel, who you mentioned. And when Weigel, made a mistake, he owned up to it really quickly, thanks to the feedback from his audience, and I trust him more as a result. Now, obviously, it was used by anti-media people to attack him, and that's always going to happen, and that's dishonest. But his ability to react to the audience makes him better. For me, we should also not lose sight of the fact that these are different storytelling vehicles. We can tell stories differently thanks to social networks. And, for Twitter, for me, it was covering a tornado in Joplin, Missouri in 2011. This was a departure from my usual media beat because I'm a big weather geek as well. And I mostly used Twitter to cover the tornado, the aftermath of the tornado, mostly because I couldn't really reach my editors in New York. But it also ended up being a way to send them material. Tweeting what I was hearing, tweeting what I was seeing, tweeting my choices about covering the story, ended up being, for me, a wake-up about how to use Twitter, not just to share links, but to tell the story differently. And I'm sure there are people younger than me at CNN doing that now with Instagram and Snapchat, figuring out ways to tell stories on the phone that can do that. So that's how I view it. And I think the idea of a quest applies to a lot of reporters, and Maggie's a great example.
Thanks for your question, and I just want to say it's so great that you are here with your dad and you're having this cross-generational debate. It's fantastic. Yeah. Thanks. Go ahead. We'll have, I think, just one more question because we're running into our deadline, but there is going to be a cocktail party after this, so we can continue to mingle and ask questions then.
My name is Dan, and I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to ask 1A and 1B. So I get my two questions. I'm just going to pick up on what you said earlier, Dawna, and I'd like to take you to task, Brian, on something. Do you not think the media should be, or is the media remorseful to any degree on the coverage during the campaign of how they covered Trump versus the other Republican candidates? Because surely there were daytime rallies that were not in prime time, that were covered live. So did John Kasich have them, so did Ted Cruz. Ratings, isn't it a rather shameful exploitive exercise for ratings that he was covered in this fashion?
Let me take that first, and then I'll take a second. And hopefully, So I think it's too simplistic to say ratings, and here's why. If we're showing a rally live, there's no ads, which means we're actually not making money off it. If anything, we're making less money. I think it's an imprecise argument to say, well, Trump was good for the profits, is good for the bottom line. It doesn't really add up. However, Trump was new, Trump was different, Trump was shocking, he was offensive, he was exciting, he was appalling, he was all those things, he was all of it. And that was a story that Cruz and Kasich and Jeb Bush weren't. And I think that's more of a problem for political strategists than it was for journalists. I think journalists were covering the story. And it's not our job to look ahead to Election Day and ask ourselves, is he going to win or lose based on our coverage? I don't think that's our job. That's a very different job than what has traditionally been the job of journalists. Now, it's true a lot of journalists didn't think he was going to win and expected Clinton to win. All the data pointed in that direction. But I don't think it was our job to figure out whether he was going to win or not. So.
Question.
No, but that's my answer. Is there remorse? I think remorse is the wrong word. Has there been soul searching? Yes.
Well, is Jeff Zucker stated that there was some way that he thought your network could have covered, or cable media could have covered better?
Yeah, one thing that Zucker has said publicly that I thought was notable was that we did spend too much time showing too many rallies, in raw form early on in the primaries. And, you look back, you think about that. Why was that happening? Well, it's because something new was happening. There's a phenomenon. This unusual candidate, this celebrity was having these rallies, saying these profane things. It was news. But he has said in retrospect, too many of those were shown versus the other candidates. Now, again, I would go back to the strategist. I would argue all day, Ted Cruz could have had a rally and surprised us and said new things every day. But I understand the criticism, and I think it's important that we not just have that soul searching and move on. You know, there will have to be different decisions made in the future coverage.
Could be the subject of many PhD theses.
Exactly.
My other question was this. I love the apple and the banana. They're terrific. But how do you juxtapose this with Jon Stewart a decade or so ago talked about crossfire and having polar extremes on the air and nothing meaningful taking place? So every night on Anderson Cooper or on Don Lemon, we see Jack Kingston and Paul Begala predictably saying what they say every night. And what do we learn from this, other than?
Well, I think Jack and Paul are better than that.
Well, individually they may be wonderful, but what do we learn when what they're going to say is so predictably either in Trump's camp or in the anti-Trump camp?
I think you're selling them short. I was surprised today to hear a Trump supporter on CNN say they should release both memos, not just the Republican memo, but they should release both memos. So I think you're selling them short. I think they do. I think they're not that. I think they're not that predictable. But I think the bigger point is we need to hear the debate that's raging in America, and it is raging every day. And these partisan points of view, even though they may be repulsive to some people, they are shared by big chunks of the country. So I understood the instinct. I was grateful that CNN went out and hired Trump supporters to balance out Clinton supporters, because I need to understand as a voter how people came to those points of view. However, I think it's incumbent on the anchors to step in when there's BS and fibs and falsehoods being spewed by either or both or one side. And that's where I think it's interesting. I'm a fan of let's see the sides debating. I'm even more of a fan of let's have four people, a Trump skeptic from the right and a Trump fan on the right and a Trump hater on the left, and maybe like a moderate. Let's hear a wide variety of opinions. But it's incumbent on the anchors to jump in when there's nonsense being spewed. And I would say the anchors do that a lot. You might say they don't. But I think really at the end of the day, it comes back to the anchor or the host to referee and to assert fact. And honestly, when I look at CNN's air now versus, let's say, 2 years ago, one of the changes is you're seeing these anchors read these essays, or whatever we call them. We can call them an essay, call them an intro. Don Lemon will do a 5-minute intro. Anderson, a 5-minute. Tapper, I turn on at 4 o'clock now. I want to hear how Tapper's going to frame the story. They are asserting fact and decency and truth in ways that I don't think anybody was a couple of years ago. Now, some Trump voters think that's biased, and some liberals think we're not going far enough, and this, we can fight about it all day, but I am seeing more analysis, more perspective on the air on CNN. And it's personally something that I'm watching more of it because I work there, but as a viewer, I'm watching more of it because I'm glad they're asserting fact in this confusing world that sometimes comes across like it's post-fact. That's my impression of it, but I'm grateful for yours. And since we're going to have this reception, I would love to hear other people's thoughts about the coverage.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.
Brian, thank you so much. Here's to more reasoned debate, more optimism, more listening to both sides, absolutely, and thanks for being here and helping us try to make sense of the moment we're in. Really
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me here. Great to be here.
We've been treated to a superb hour and a half of discussion, and on behalf of the CJF and the entire audience, I'd like to thank the force of nature that is Brian Stelter for being with us tonight in Toronto. And thank you to Dawna Friesen. She is a news person to her core, and we are so grateful for the work she put into making this a discussion we can all benefit from. Please join me in a round of applause for Dawna and Brian. Okay, this is the time in the program where I bring you a CJF commercial before I let you have a drink. We have a preview of our upcoming events, and we hope you'll join us. We can all agree no one likes fake news except when it's funny, and we could all use a laugh. So on February 13th, we're joined by North America's trusted source of news, the Beaverton. With their fake news platform, the show offers up satire and commentary on Canadian life, politics, and the world around us. We have the co-anchors and co-creators of the show in conversation with Adrienne Batra. And on March 6th, in celebration of International Women's Day, we're joined by 3 of the country's top investigative journalists, fearless women, Robin Doolittle, Tanya Talaga, and Connie Walker will share the stories behind the stories that matter, the big and important work they brought us last year. The talk is moderated by Matt Galloway. And the Canadian Journalism Foundation's awards program is now open. We have awards for excellence in journalism, lifetime achievement, media literacy, and some valuable fellowships for investigative journalists and for Indigenous journalists. So check out our website and apply. The recipients will be celebrated at our annual awards gala in June. And finally, thanks to all of you for joining us and for supporting the work of the Canadian Journalism Foundation. Please join us now for a cocktail reception. You'll have the chance to meet Brian and continue this conversation. Thanks so much.